They say you never truly know someone until you've seen how they leave. I thought I knew Cole, my husband of 14 years. He wasn't perfect. None of us are. But he had this way of making even our worst days feel manageable. His smile could diffuse an argument, and his optimism, though sometimes misplaced, was always contagious. But there's a fine line between optimism and delusion, and I was about to learn just how far Cole was willing to cross it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started with the credit card statements I never saw. Cole handled our finances. That was our arrangement from the beginning. I managed our daughter Charlotte's school schedules, medical appointments, and social calendar while running my small online business from home. Cole managed the money. We shared a home, a daughter, and what I thought was a life built on trust. But apparently, we didn't share everything. Not the secret credit cards, not the mounting debt, and certainly not the truth about where he was really going on those business trips. I'm not here to paint Cole as a villain, at least not entirely. He had dreams, and for years I supported them. But when his dreams started requiring expensive dinners with a woman named Brooke from his office, luxury hotel stays charged to cards I didn't know existed, and finally, a one-way ticket to Bali that drained our savings account, I would have expected him to at least loop me in. He didn't. Instead, he went behind my back, accumulated $35,000 in debt, and handed me a financial and emotional bomb with the timer already counting down to 0. The day it all came crashing down started like any other Tuesday. I was preparing Charlotte's lunch, checking emails from clients, and planning the week's meals. My phone buzzed with a text from Cole. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." Nothing unusual. Cole often worked late, especially since his promotion last year. I replied with a quick, "Okay, love you," and continued with my day. It wasn't until I checked our joint account to pay Charlotte's dance class fee that I felt the first tremor of what would become an earthquake in my life. The account was nearly empty. Just $237 remained of what should have been close to $4,000. My heart raced as I called Cole. Straight to voicemail. I texted. No response. I called his office. "I'm sorry, Peggy," his assistant Hillary said, her voice unusually gentle. "Cole took a leave of absence starting today. I thought you knew." Leave of absence? This was the first I'd heard of it. I hung up and immediately began searching through Cole's home office. That's when I found it. A letter, not even sealed in an envelope, sitting on his desk, as if he wanted me to find it. As if this cowardly goodbye note was somehow enough. "Peggy, I can't do this anymore. The suburban life, the routines, the responsibility, it's suffocating me. I need space to figure out who I really am and what I want. Brooke understands me in ways you never could. Handle the bills. I've set up automatic payments for most of them. I'm sorry it ended this way. Cole." Automatic payments? I logged into our online banking again, this time digging deeper than the surface-level overview I usually checked. What I found made me physically ill. Multiple credit cards I'd never seen before, all maxed out. Personal loans, cash advances, a second mortgage he'd somehow taken out on our house without my knowledge, all totaling just over $35,000. And then, there was Charlotte, my sweet, perceptive 9-year-old daughter. How do you explain to your child that her father has abandoned the family for his girlfriend? That he's left us drowning in debt? You don't. Not at first. You tell yourself you'll shield her from the mess for as long as you can. But Charlotte isn't just any child. She's observant, intuitive beyond her years. I've always been proud of her intelligence, her emotional awareness. But in moments like these, I almost wished she weren't so perceptive. The house felt different that night. Emptier somehow, though Cole traveled often enough that his physical absence wasn't unusual. It was the weight of his betrayal that seemed to fill every corner, making the familiar spaces feel foreign and cold. I sat at the kitchen table, statements spread before me, trying to make sense of numbers that refused to add up to anything but disaster. "Mom?" Charlotte's voice came from the doorway, soft but steady. She stood there in her favorite blue pajamas, clutching the stuffed elephant Cole had bought her on their daddy-daughter day last year. "Is everything okay?" I wanted to lie, to tell her that everything was fine, that Daddy was just on another business trip, that we'd see him soon. But the words wouldn't come. Charlotte has this way of looking at you, really looking, that makes dishonesty feel impossible. Her eyes, so much like Cole's, see everything. "Come here, sweetie," I said, patting the chair beside me. She climbed up, tucking her legs beneath her. "Dad's gone on a trip," I began carefully, "but it's different this time. He might be gone for a while." Charlotte studied my face, her expression far too serious for a 9-year-old. "He's not coming back, is he?" she asked simply. The directness of her question knocked the air from my lungs. How did she know? Had she heard us arguing in recent months? Had she noticed Cole's increasing absences, his distraction when he was home? "I don't think so, honey," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not anytime soon." She nodded slowly, processing this information with a calmness that both impressed and concerned me. "Is it because of Brooke? The lady who calls him sometimes?" My heart stopped. "You know about Brooke?" "I answered his phone once when you were in the shower," she said, matter-of-factly. "She thought I was you at first. She said she couldn't wait to see him Saturday." But Saturday was my dance recital, and Dad said he couldn't miss it for anything. But he had missed it. A work emergency had supposedly kept him at the office all weekend. I remembered how disappointed Charlotte had been, how she'd scanned the audience throughout her performance, hoping he'd make a last-minute appearance. "Honey, I'm so sorry," I said, pulling her close. "Your dad and we've been having problems. Adult problems. But none of this is your fault, do you understand?" She nodded against my shoulder, her small body tense. Then she pulled back, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that startled me. "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" she asked, and the adult concern in her voice broke something inside me. She was 9 years old. She should be worrying about homework and friendships, not whether we could survive her father's betrayal. "Yes," I said firmly, though I had no idea if it was true. "We're going to be okay." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded again, as if deciding to believe me. "Okay," she said simply, "then we'll figure it out." That one sentence, "we'll figure it out," hit me harder than Cole's goodbye letter ever could. My 9-year-old daughter, facing the collapse of her family with more courage than her father had shown, was offering me strength when I should have been the one reassuring her. As she hugged me goodnight and padded back to her bedroom, I sat in the silent kitchen, tears finally spilling onto the damning financial statements before me. How had we gotten here? When had Cole decided I wasn't enough? And how was I supposed to navigate this maze of debt and heartbreak while protecting Charlotte from the fallout? I didn't have the answers that night. All I knew was that somehow, I had to find the strength to keep moving forward. Not just for my sake, but for Charlotte's. Because while Cole might have abandoned his responsibilities, I couldn't afford that luxury. And somehow, looking at the determination in my daughter's eyes, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we really would figure it out. The marriage Cole and I built had always seemed solid to me. 14 years of shared history inside, jokes, and the beautiful chaos of raising Charlotte together. We met in college, both of us studying business, though Cole was the one with the real ambition. I was content with smaller dreams, eventually starting my freelance graphic design business so I could work from home after Charlotte was born. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our life in the suburbs of Denver wasn't extravagant, but it was comfortable. Our 3-bedroom house with the blue shutters and the maple tree in the front yard. Sunday morning pancakes that Cole would shape into animals to make Charlotte giggle. Family game nights where Cole's competitive streak would emerge, much to Charlotte's delight. Monthly date nights where we'd reconnect as a couple, not just as parents. At least, that's what I thought we were doing. Cole had always been the charismatic one, drawing people to him effortlessly with his warm laugh and attentive demeanor. I'd watched him charm clients at company parties, turning strangers into friends, within minutes. His coworkers adored him, especially after his promotion to regional marketing director 2 years ago. I had been so proud of him, watching him give his acceptance speech at the company gala, his eyes finding mine in the crowd as he thanked his supportive wife who made it all possible. The irony of those words wasn't lost on me now. Looking back, I could see the subtle shifts that should have been warning signs. The gradual change in our routine. The way Cole began working later and later, his phone increasingly glued to his hand, always angled away from me. The decrease in intimacy, both emotional and physical. The sudden interest in his appearance, new clothes, a gym membership he actually used, a different cologne I hadn't picked out. I had attributed it all to his promotion, the natural stress of increased responsibility. I had been supportive, picking up more slack at home, making excuses to Charlotte when he missed her school events. Daddy's working hard for us, I'd tell her, believing it myself. Our home had been filled with photos documenting our life together. Cole and me on our honeymoon in Puerto Vallarta, sunburned and grinning. Charlotte as a newborn, cradled in Cole's arms, his face a mixture of terror and awe. Family camping trips, holiday gatherings, Charlotte's dance recitals, a visual timeline of what I thought was a happy family. Now, each photo felt like evidence of a life that had been partially fabricated, a happiness that had an expiration date I hadn't been aware of. The morning after discovering Cole's letter, I woke up disoriented, the events of the previous day crashing back into my consciousness. For a fleeting moment, I hoped it had all been a nightmare. But the empty space beside me and the stack of credit card statements on my nightstand confirmed the harsh reality. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to cry, face buried in my pillow to muffle the sound. Then I washed my face, applied concealer to the dark circles under my eyes, and went to wake Charlotte for school. She was already up, dressed in her uniform, making her bed with a precision unusual for a 9-year-old. "Good morning, Mom," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I made my lunch already." I stood in her doorway, momentarily speechless. Charlotte had never made her own lunch before. I'd always handled that, packing her favorites and including little notes with silly jokes or words of encouragement. "Thank you, honey," I managed, my throat tight. "That's very helpful." She nodded, sliding her packed lunch into her backpack. "I thought you might be tired this morning." The perceptiveness of children never ceased to amaze me. Charlotte wasn't just going through the motions of her morning routine. She was intentionally lightening my load, stepping up in ways no child should have to. "Charlotte," I said, sitting on the edge of her freshly made bed, "we need to talk about what's happening." She sat beside me, small hands folded in her lap. "Dad's not coming back," she said. Not a question this time, but a statement of fact. "No, I don't think he is," I confirmed, watching her face carefully, for signs of distress. To my surprise, she merely nodded. "I figured. He took his special watch collection, the one Grandpa gave him that he said he'd give to my kids someday." I hadn't even noticed. The collection of vintage watches that had belonged to Cole's father was indeed missing from the display case in his office. The fact that Charlotte had noticed this detail and understood its significance was both impressive and heartbreaking. "Dad also left us with some money problems," I continued, deciding that honesty, filtered appropriately for her age, was the best approach. He spent more than we had, and now there are bills we need to pay. Charlotte's brow furrowed. Is that why... You were looking at all those papers last night? The ones that made you cry? I nodded, swallowing hard. Yes. But you don't need to worry about that. It's my job to figure it out, not yours. But we're a team now, right? She asked, her eyes, so much like Cole's, looking directly into mine. Just you and me? Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. We're a team, but I'm still the grown-up, and some problems are for grown-ups to solve. She seemed to consider this, then reached over and took my hand. Her small fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength. I can help more around the house, she offered. And I don't need new dance shoes yet. My old ones still fit okay. The lump in my throat grew larger. Charlotte knew exactly which battles I was fighting, both practical and emotional, and was already strategizing ways to help. She was 9 years old and thinking about budgeting. Thank you, sweetheart, I said, squeezing her hand. But you just focus on being a kid, okay? That's your job. She nodded, but the determined look in her eyes told me she had no intention of sitting this one out. In many ways, Charlotte was like me, quiet, observant, thoughtful. But she had also inherited Cole's stubborn streak, his refusal to back down from a challenge. The thought was both comforting and terrifying. As I drove her to school that morning, the routine achingly normal against the backdrop of our collapsing life, I couldn't help but wonder what Cole was doing at that exact moment. Was he on a plane to Bali with Brooke? Were they laughing about how easily he had walked away? Was he having second thoughts? Or had he already committed fully to his new life, erasing us from his narrative? Mom? Charlotte's voice pulled me from my spiraling thoughts. It's going to be okay, you know. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, this child who was suddenly speaking with the wisdom of someone much older. How do you know that? I asked, genuinely curious about her certainty. She shrugged, looking out the window at the familiar streets of our neighborhood. Because you're stronger than Dad. You always were. He just didn't see it. Her words settled over me like a warm blanket, unexpected comfort in the cold reality of our situation, out of the mouths of babes, as they say. As I watched her walk into school, backpack bouncing slightly with each step, I made a silent promise to both of us. We would survive this. We would rebuild. And somehow, we would find a way forward that didn't include Cole. What I didn't realize then was just how instrumental Charlotte would be in making that promise a reality. The full extent of Cole's betrayal revealed itself like a slow-motion car crash over the next few days. Each new discovery was another impact, another shattering of what I thought our life had been. After dropping Charlotte at school, I called in sick to my freelance jobs and began a systematic investigation of our financial situation. What I found made my initial shock seem like a gentle wave compared to the tsunami that was our actual reality. The joint checking account that had been drained to $230 was just the beginning. Cole had opened 3 separate credit cards in his name over the past year, all maxed out at their $8,000 limits. He had taken a personal loan from our bank for $15,000, using our house as collateral, and somehow managed to secure a line of credit against his 401k. In total, he had accumulated $35,176 in debt, most of it in the past 8 months. 8 months. The timeline wasn't lost on me. 8 months ago was when Cole had gone to that marketing conference in San Diego, the same conference where Brooke had been a guest speaker. I remembered how animated he'd been upon his return, talking about innovative marketing strategies and the brilliant speaker he'd met. "She has such a fresh perspective, Peggy," he'd said, eyes bright with enthusiasm I'd mistaken for professional admiration. Now I understood it had been the beginning of the end. I found the bank statement showing the withdrawal of our entire savings, 4872.3 days ago. The same day he'd texted me that he would be working late. The same day he'd apparently purchased a one-way ticket to Bali, according to the travel confirmation I found in our shared email account. He hadn't even bothered to delete it. One ticket, not two. So either Brooke had purchased her own, or she was meeting him there later. Either way, Cole had left the country, emptied our accounts, and disappeared with his girlfriend, leaving me to deal with the financial carnage he'd created. The phone rang, startling me from my daze. The caller ID showed Denver First Bank. My stomach dropped as I answered. "Hello, Mrs. Reynolds. This is Marcus from the mortgage department at Denver First. I'm calling because your mortgage payment was declined this morning." Of course it was. The automatic payment had been set up to draw from the account Cole had emptied. "I see," I said, my voice sounding strangely calm to my own ears. "There's been a situation with that account. My husband has left the country and withdrawn all the funds." There was an uncomfortable pause on the line. "I'm very sorry to hear that, ma'am. However, we'll need the payment processed within the grace period to avoid late fees and potential credit impacts." "And when is the grace period over?" "You have until the 15th, ma'am. That's 5 days from now. 5 days to come up with $1,176 for the mortgage payment. 5 days when I had less than $300 in my account and credit cards that were likely already maxed out, though I hadn't checked mine yet." "Thank you, Marcus. I'll take care of it," I said, already knowing I had no idea how I would manage that. After hanging up, I sat in the silent kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of Cole's betrayal, and let myself absorb the magnitude of what had happened. This wasn't just an affair, not just a man having a midlife crisis. This was calculated abandonment. Cole had systematically prepared for his departure, accumulating resources and debt that would fund his new life while leaving, me to deal with the consequences. I thought about calling my parents, but pride stopped me. They had never fully approved of Cole, had always thought I was rushing into marriage too young. "He's charming," my mother had said, "but charm isn't the same as character." The thought of telling them they had been right all along was too painful to bear. My sister Peggy would help if she could, but she was struggling with her own financial issues after her divorce last year. Friends might offer emotional support, but none were in a position to help with debts of this magnitude. I was alone in this. Alone with a 9-year-old daughter and a mountain of debt I hadn't created. My phone buzzed with a text. For a fleeting, ridiculous moment, I thought it might be Cole, coming to his senses, telling me it had all been a terrible mistake. Instead, it was Charlotte's school. "Mrs. Reynolds, please call regarding Charlotte. Non-emergency." My heart raced as I dialed the school's number. Had Charlotte broken down? Was she acting out? Had Cole contacted her somehow? "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Ms. Garcia, Charlotte's teacher. I wanted to check in with you directly. Charlotte mentioned this morning that her father has left the family. She seemed very matter-of-fact about it, which concerned me." I closed my eyes, guilt washing over me. In my shock and focus on the financial disaster, I hadn't thought to notify the school about our situation. "Yes, that's correct," I confirmed. "It's very recent. Just yesterday, in fact. I'm still processing it myself. How is Charlotte doing?" "She's remarkably composed," Ms. Garcia said. "Almost too composed, if you understand what I mean." She completed her math test this morning with her usual precision, participated in group work, and hasn't shown any obvious signs of distress. But children often process trauma differently than adults. I wanted to make sure you were aware of our school counseling resources. "Thank you," I said, throat tight. "I'll definitely keep that in mind." After arranging a meeting with the school counselor for later in the week, I hung up and stared at the wall calendar in our kitchen, the one where I'd meticulously noted all of Charlotte's activities, Cole's business trips, and our family obligations. The current month showed 3 dance lessons, a dentist appointment, Charlotte's science fair, and a note on the 25th that read, "Anniversary dinner, 14 years. 14 years. nearly a decade and a half of what I thought was building a life together, all erased with a cowardly note and an empty bank account. I took the calendar off the wall, placed it face down on the counter, and made a decision. I could fall apart, or I could fight. For Charlotte's sake, falling apart wasn't an option. I opened my laptop and began making a list. First, immediate financial needs: mortgage, utilities, groceries. Next, legal consultation. I needed to understand my options regarding the debt Cole had left behind. Finally, income. I needed to increase my freelance work immediately. By the time the school bus dropped Charlotte off that afternoon, I had the skeleton of a plan. It wasn't much, and it certainly didn't address the full scope of our problems. But it was a start. Charlotte walked in, her face lighting up when she saw me waiting at the door. For a moment, she looked like any other 9-year-old coming home from school, eager to share stories, ready for a snack, homework still an abstract concern for later. Then her expression shifted subtly as she remembered our new reality. "Is Dad back?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "No, sweetheart, he's not coming back." She nodded, accepting this with a maturity that broke my heart. Then she surprised me by pulling a folded piece of paper from her backpack. "I made this for you in art class," she said, handing it to me. It was a drawing of 2 stick figures, one tall with long hair, one small with pigtails, standing hand in hand beside a house. Above them, in Charlotte's careful handwriting, were the words, "Mom and me. We are strong." I stared at the simple drawing, emotion welling up in my throat. My 9-year-old daughter, processing her father's abandonment through art, had created not a scene of sadness or loss, but one of strength and resilience. "It's beautiful," I managed, pulling her into a hug. "And you're right. We are strong." "Strong enough to handle Dad's mess?" she asked, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I pulled back to look at her, surprised again by her perception. "Yes," I said with more conviction than I felt. "Strong enough for that and more." Little did I know just how much strength we would both need in the days to come. The first week after Cole left was a blur of numbers, phone calls, and mounting anxiety. Each day brought a new financial surprise, another hidden debt, another system that was on the verge of collapse. The mortgage payment was just the beginning. There was Charlotte's dance academy tuition, $300 due by the end of the month. The electric bill arrived with a past due notice I'd never seen before. Apparently, Cole had stopped paying it 2 months ago, and we were now at risk of disconnection. The credit card I used for groceries and household expenses was declined at the supermarket, leaving me to put back half the items in my cart while the cashier looked on with barely concealed pity. I discovered that Cole had been dipping into my personal accounts as well. The modest savings I'd accumulated from my freelance work, just over $3,000 I'd been setting aside for taxes, had been reduced to $847. He'd taken the rest, using the password I'd never thought to change because I never thought I'd need to protect my money from my husband. It wasn't just financial chaos he'd left behind. There were emotional landmines everywhere. The sympathetic looks from neighbors who'd seen Cole loading suitcases into his car. The birthday party invitation for Charlotte from a classmate whose mother called to check if Charlotte would still be attending given the circumstances. The whispers at school pickup that stopped abruptly when I approached. Worst of all was watching Charlotte navigate this new landscape. She maintained her composure in public, but at home I'd catch her sitting on her bed, staring at the family photo on her nightstand. The 3 of us at the beach last summer, all smiles and sunburns. She'd quickly wipe away tears when she noticed me watching. One night, I found her in Cole's closet, wrapped in one of his old sweatshirts, fast asleep. On the floor, it swallowed her small frame, a tangible reminder of the father-sized hole in her life. I carried her back to her bed, my own tears falling silently as I tucked her in. He didn't even say goodbye, she whispered, eyes still closed. He just left. I know, baby, I said, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. I know. The practical challenges were equally overwhelming. My freelance graphic design work had been steady but modest, enough to supplement our income when combined with Cole's salary, but nowhere near enough to support us alone and address the mountain of debt he'd left behind. I started reaching out to former clients, offering discounts for bulk projects. I applied for more consistent work with the marketing agencies I'd previously done one-off jobs for. I even updated my long-dormant LinkedIn profile at 2 a.m., desperate for any opportunity. That might help us stay afloat. The legal implications were just as daunting. After scraping together money for a consultation, I met with a lawyer named Dominic who specialized in family law. His office was sparse but professional, and he listened patiently as I outlined our situation. So he's left the country with another woman, emptied your accounts and left you with substantial debt, Dominic summarized, his expression grim. And much of this debt was acquired without your knowledge. That's right, I confirmed. Is there any way to protect myself from being responsible for it? Dominic leaned back in his chair, considering. It's complicated. Colorado is not a community, property state, but it is an equitable distribution state. Generally speaking, debts acquired during marriage are considered marital debt, regardless of whose name they're in. My heart sank. So I'm responsible for all of it? Not necessarily, he cautioned. If you can prove he took out these loans fraudulently, or that they were used solely for his benefit or to further his affair, you might have grounds to contest your liability. But it's an uphill battle, especially with him out of the country. Can we freeze the accounts? Stop him from spending more? We can try, but bank accounts that have already been emptied are a moot point. As for the credit cards, in his name, you're not an authorized user, so you can't close them. The best approach is to file for divorce immediately and request temporary orders regarding finances. I flinched at the word divorce. Despite everything, hearing it said aloud made it real in a way that even Cole's absence hadn't. The divorce will take time, Dominic continued. But temporary orders could potentially protect you from further financial damage. Have you tried contacting him directly? I shook my head. His phone goes straight to voicemail. He hasn't answered emails. His parents claim they don't know where he is, though I'm not sure I believe them. Dominic nodded, making notes. Document everything. Every communication attempt, every bill, every piece of evidence about the affair and the financial deception. It will all be relevant. I left his office with a folder of paperwork, a $400 charge on my nearly maxed-out credit card, and the heavy knowledge that untangling myself from Cole's mess would be neither quick nor easy. At home, I found Charlotte, sitting at the kitchen table, carefully counting coins from her piggy bank. "What are you doing, sweetie?" I asked, setting down my purse and the intimidating folder of legal documents. "Counting my money," she replied without looking up. "I have 43 27s. "That's great," I said, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. "Are you saving for something special?" She looked up then, her eyes serious. "For us. For the bills. Dad took all our money, right? So I'm helping." The lump in my throat made it hard to speak. My 9-year-old was emptying her piggy bank to help pay bills her father had abandoned. "Oh, Charlotte," I said, sitting beside her and pulling her into a hug. "That's incredibly sweet of you, but this isn't your responsibility. Your job is to be a kid." She pulled back, her expression stubborn. "But we're a team now, remember? Teams help each other." I stared at my daughter, this tiny person with an enormous heart, and felt something shift inside me. The overwhelming despair of the past week began to transform into something else, a fierce determination. "You're right," I said, holding her gaze. "We are a team. But you know what? We're going to be okay without this money. I promise." "How? Do you know?" she asked, echoing the question I'd asked her days earlier. I smiled, borrowing her own wisdom. Because we're stronger than Dad. We always were. He just didn't see it. For the first time since Cole left, I truly believed those words might be true. Charlotte had always been perceptive, a quiet observer who absorbed everything around her. As an only child, she'd grown comfortable in adult company, often startling. Cole's friends with her insightful comments or unexpected questions. "She's an old soul," people would say, and Cole and I would beam with pride at our precocious daughter. Now, that same perceptiveness that had once seemed like a charming quirk was becoming something else entirely. A survival tool. A strength. Neither Cole nor I had fully appreciated. 10 days after Cole's departure, I was sitting at my makeshift office in the corner of our living room, juggling 3 different freelance projects in a desperate attempt to boost our income. Each ping from my email sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Another bill, another demand. For payment? Another rejection from a potential client? Charlotte walked in from the kitchen, a glass of water in one hand and a notepad in the other. She sat cross-legged on the couch, observing me with that uncanny focus she sometimes had. "Mom," she said finally, "I think we need a system." I looked up from my laptop, bleary-eyed from staring at design mock-ups for hours. "A system?" She nodded, all business. "For the bills and stuff. You look stressed all the time and you keep forgetting things." She wasn't wrong. Just yesterday I'd forgotten to pick her up from dance class, arriving 20 minutes late, breathless and apologetic, to find her sitting patiently on the steps with her teacher. The day before, I'd missed a deadline for a small project, losing both the job and the potential for repeat business. "I made this," Charlotte continued, holding up her notepad. It was a hand-drawn calendar, each date meticulously filled with information in her neat handwriting. "It has all the bill due dates from the papers on your desk, my school stuff, and your work deadlines." I took the notepad, stunned by its thoroughness. She had indeed captured every bill due date, color-coded them by urgency, red for very important, orange for regular important, and even noted which ones were past due. She'd included her school events, my project deadlines, and even reminded me of routine things like trash day and grocery shopping. "Charlotte," I said, equal parts impressed and concerned, "when did you do this?" "Last night after you fell asleep on the couch," she said matter-of-factly. "You were snoring and your papers were everywhere. I thought it might help if it was all in one place." I stared at my daughter, this extraordinary child who was stepping up in ways I never could have anticipated or wanted. 9-year-olds shouldn't be organizing bill payments or worrying about their mother's work deadlines. They should be playing with friends, obsessing over silly TV shows, complaining about homework. And yet, here she was, offering her own brand of support in the most practical way she knew how. "This is really helpful," I admitted, flipping through the pages of her carefully constructed calendar. "But I don't want you to worry about all this adult stuff." "I'm not worried," she said with that straightforward confidence only children can truly manage. "I'm helping. There's a difference." I looked at her closely, trying to gauge whether this was truly a healthy way for her to process our situation or a warning sign of anxiety manifesting as control. "You know," I said carefully, "it's okay to be upset about Dad leaving. You don't have to be strong all the time." Something flickered across her face, a brief glimpse of the hurt child beneath the composed exterior. "I know," she said quietly. "But being sad doesn't fix anything. Being helpful does." The simple wisdom in her statement struck me with unexpected force. Charlotte wasn't just coping. She was actively choosing a response that gave her a sense of control in a situation where everything felt chaotic. It wasn't that she wasn't processing her father's abandonment. She was doing it in her own way, on her own terms. "You're pretty amazing, you know that?" I said, pulling her into a side hug. She leaned against me for a moment, allowing herself the comfort of physical contact. "I get it from you," she replied. I wasn't sure that was true. In the days since Cole left, I'd felt anything but amazing, just barely holding things together, constantly on the verge of tears. Waking up in the middle of the night with panic attacks about how we'd survive. But maybe Charlotte saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Maybe her confidence wasn't misplaced. Ms. Garcia says I have emotional intelligence, Charlotte added, pronouncing the term carefully. She says it means I understand feelings, mine and other people's. You've been talking to Ms. Garcia about this? I asked, surprised. Charlotte nodded. She's nice. She doesn't make me talk about Dad if I don't want to. She just lets me draw. And sometimes we play this game with feelings cards. I made a mental note to thank Charlotte's teacher for this quiet support I hadn't even been aware of. Yesterday, Charlotte continued, we talked about how sometimes when bad things happen, people find out they're stronger than they thought. That's very true, I agreed, wondering at the wisdom being imparted to my child by this thoughtful educator. Ms. Garcia says it's called post-traumatic growth, Charlotte stated with academic precision. It means after something really hard, you can grow in new ways. She paused, considering this concept. I think that's happening to us already. I studied my daughter, this small person navigating enormous emotional territory with a maturity that both impressed and concerned me. Was this healthy processing or premature adulthood being forced upon her? The line seemed blurry, and I made another mental note to discuss this with the school counselor at our upcoming appointment. Maybe you're right, I said softly. But it's also okay if sometimes we're just sad or angry or confused. Growth doesn't happen all at once. Charlotte nodded solemnly. I know. I still get mad when I think about Dad and that Brooke lady. Her face darkened momentarily. Sometimes I think about sending him pictures of us having fun without him so he knows what he's missing. The flash of vindictiveness was so unexpected from my usually empathetic child that I almost laughed. It was perhaps the most age-appropriate response she'd had yet. I get that feeling, I admitted. But you know what might be even better? What? Actually having fun without him. Not for the pictures, but for us. She considered this, then nodded slowly. That makes sense. We could start with movie night. Dad always picked boring movies anyway. This time I did laugh, a genuine sound that felt foreign after days of stress and grief. You're absolutely right. Dad's taste in movies was terrible. Charlotte grinned, delighted to have made me laugh. For a moment, she looked like the carefree child she was supposed to be, rather than the miniature adult she'd been forced to become. I looked again at the calendar she'd created, at her careful handwriting and thoughtful organization. Yes, it was concerning that she felt the need to take on this responsibility. But it was also a tangible reminder that I wasn't facing this crisis alone. Charlotte wasn't just a child I needed to protect. She was becoming an active participant in our survival, offering her own unique strengths to our suddenly two-person team. I would need to find the balance, allowing her to help in ways that gave her agency without burdening her with adult concerns. It wouldn't be easy, but then again, nothing about our new reality was. How about we use this calendar as our master plan, I suggested. But we add some fun things too? Things to look forward to that don't cost much money? Charlotte's eyes lit up. Like a park picnic, or a movie night with popcorn? Or maybe we could camp in the living room like we did when I was little? The enthusiasm in her voice was contagious. All of that, I agreed. Starting tonight. For the first time since Cole left, I felt something besides panic and grief. A tentative hope that perhaps, with Charlotte's unexpected strength beside me, we might not just survive this crisis, but eventually find our way to something better. 2. Weeks after Cole's departure, the reality of our situation had settled into a dull, persistent ache. The initial shock had given way to a grinding routine of work, worry, and forced normalcy for Charlotte's sake. I had developed a habit of crying in the shower, where the sound of running water would mask my sobs from Charlotte's perceptive ears. The meeting with Charlotte's school counselor had been both reassuring and concerning. Dr. Rivera, a kind-eyed woman with a gentle voice, had explained that Charlotte was showing remarkable resilience, but also signs of taking on too much responsibility. Children from disrupted homes often develop what we call parentification, she had explained. They assume adult roles and responsibilities beyond what's appropriate for their age. Charlotte is showing some of these tendencies. Is that harmful? I'd asked, guilt twisting in my stomach. Had I been leaning too heavily on Charlotte's apparent strength? It can be, if it goes too far, Dr. Rivera had said. Children need to be children. But some level of increased responsibility can actually be empowering, giving them a sense of control in circumstances where they might otherwise feel powerless. I carried this conversation with me as I navigated our new daily life, constantly, questioning whether I was striking the right balance between accepting Charlotte's help and protecting her childhood. The financial situation remained dire. I had managed to negotiate a payment plan for the mortgage, buying us a month of breathing room, but the credit card companies were less forgiving. Collection calls had become a daily occurrence, often during dinner or Charlotte's bedtime routine, creating a constant background of stress. I tried to shield Charlotte from these conversations, stepping outside or speaking in hushed tones, but she was too observant to miss the tension in my voice or the worry lines that had become permanent fixtures on my face. One evening, after a particularly aggressive call from a debt collector, I returned to the living room to find Charlotte, sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, eyes wide with concern. "Was that about Dad's money again?" she asked. I hesitated, torn between honesty and protection. "Yes, but it's nothing for you to worry about. I'm handling it." She gave me a look that was far too knowing for a 9-year-old. "You say that, but your face gets all pinchy when you talk to them. And sometimes you forgot to eat dinner because you're working so much." I hadn't realized she'd noticed that. The meals I'd skipped to save food or because stress had killed my appetite. "I'm trying my best," I admitted, sitting beside her on the couch. "Some days are harder than others." "Is it because of the numbers on those papers? The ones you hide when I come in the room?" I closed my eyes briefly, weighing my options. How much should I tell her? How much was she already piecing together on her own? "Yes," I said finally. "Your dad left us with some bills that are hard to pay right now. But that's my problem to solve, not yours." "But what if I can help?" she persisted. "I'm good at math. Ms. Garcia says I'm at a 6th grade level." The pride in her voice made me smile despite everything. "You are amazing at math, and I'm so proud of that. But this is different." "Why?" she challenged, with that direct gaze that always made me feel as though she could see straight through any adult evasion. I considered various responses, weighing the burden of knowledge against the harm of exclusion. Charlotte wasn't being helped by my vague reassurances. She was clearly aware enough of our situation to be worried. Perhaps controlled information was better than fearful imagination. "Because it's a lot of money," I said carefully. "More than $35,000. That's a grown-up problem, and while I appreciate your offer to help, I don't want you spending your childhood worrying about adult financial issues." She absorbed this information, her brow furrowing in concentration. $35,000, she repeated, testing the number. "That's a lot." Then she looked up at me, her expression shifting from concern to something like determination. "But you're smart, Mom. You'll figure it out." Her confidence in me was both heartwarming and terrifying. What if I couldn't figure it out? What if her faith in me was misplaced? "I'll need to make some changes to how we live," I said, deciding that preparing her for practical adjustments was better than pretending everything was fine. "We'll need to be careful with money for a while. That might mean fewer new clothes, or maybe switching to a less expensive dance class." I expected disappointment, perhaps even tears. Instead, Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense," she said. "We can make a budget. We learned about those in math last year." She paused, considering. "And I don't need new dance clothes. Emily's mom is always saying how fast kids grow out of stuff. Maybe she has some that Emily outgrew." I stared at my daughter, this child who was facing the upheaval of her family with more grace and practical thinking than many adults I knew. Part of me wanted to wrap her in a bubble, to protect her from every harsh reality of our situation. Another part recognized that excluding her entirely from our new reality wasn't protection. It was denial of her capacity to understand and adapt. "You're pretty incredible, you know that?" I said, pulling her into a hug. She leaned against me, allowing herself to be a child for a moment. "Does that mean we can work on the budget together?" I laughed despite myself. "We can work on some of it together," I compromised. "The parts that affect your life directly. The rest is still my job." She seemed satisfied with this arrangement, and as we sat together on the couch that evening, planning small economies and reasonable sacrifices, I realized something important. Protection didn't always mean shielding Charlotte from every difficulty. Sometimes it meant guiding her through challenges in age-appropriate ways, helping her develop resilience without burdening her with adult responsibilities. It was a delicate balance, one I would need to navigate carefully in the days ahead. But, for the first time, I began to believe that perhaps Charlotte's involvement in our recovery wasn't just inevitable. In some ways, it might actually be beneficial for both of us. A month after Cole's departure, we had settled into a new routine that was equal parts exhausting and empowering. Each day brought its own challenges, small victories, and moments of doubt, creating a patchwork existence that bore little resemblance to our life before. My alarm now rang at 5 a.m. instead of 6:30, giving me 2 quiet hours to work on freelance projects before Charlotte woke up. I had secured 3 new regular clients, including a local restaurant chain that needed weekly social media graphics, and a startup that required ongoing website updates. The pay wasn't spectacular, but it was consistent. Something I desperately needed. By 7 a.m., I would wake Charlotte, and we'd move through our morning routine with practiced efficiency. She had taken to preparing her own lunch while I made breakfast, insisting it was her contribution to the team. I'd learned to accept this help without the crushing guilt I'd initially felt. School drop-off was followed by more client work, interspersed with phone calls to creditors, the lawyer, and occasionally, fruitless attempts to reach Cole. His phone remained off, his emails unanswered. According to his Instagram, which I checked with masochistic regularity, he and Brooke were having the time of their lives in Bali, sunset cocktails and infinity pools featuring prominently in their carefully curated photos. I had filed for divorce. With Dominic's help, the paperwork sitting in limbo as we struggled to officially serve Cole with the petition. His parents claimed not to know his exact whereabouts, though they had contacted me once to ask about seeing Charlotte. I had agreed, primarily because Charlotte deserved to maintain a relationship with grandparents who loved her, even if their son had abandoned his responsibilities. Their visit had been awkward but ultimately positive for Charlotte. They had brought her gifts, modest ones, thankfully, not the extravagant purchases that might have suggested they were trying to buy her affection, and taken her for ice cream. They had not defended Cole's actions, but had assured Charlotte that they loved her and would always be part of her life if she wanted them to be. "Did they say anything about Dad?" I had asked after they left. Charlotte had considered this carefully. "Grandma said sometimes grown-ups make mistakes they can't fix. And Grandpa said they were sorry about what happened, but they weren't sorry about having me as a granddaughter." It was perhaps the best response they could have offered, acknowledging the harm without excusing it, while reinforcing their love for Charlotte. The financial situation remained precarious. I had managed to negotiate payment plans with 2 of the credit card companies, but the third remained inflexible. The mortgage was current, but only because I had dipped into my retirement savings. A short-term solution that created long-term problems I tried not to think about. We had made adjustments to our lifestyle, some small, others more significant. Cable TV was canceled in favor of a single streaming service. Grocery shopping became an exercise in careful budgeting, with Charlotte appointed official calculator during our trips, keeping a running tally on her phone as we navigated the aisles. Dance lessons continued, but at a less expensive studio that offered discounts for parent volunteers. I now spent Saturday mornings helping with the youngest dancers in exchange for reduced tuition. Evenings developed their own rhythm. Dinner, homework, and then our business meeting. A 20-minute session where Charlotte and I would review our calendar, discuss upcoming expenses, and celebrate small financial victories. It was during one of these meetings that Charlotte had her first genuinely brilliant idea. "Mom," she said, looking up from the notepad where she was dutifully recording our weekly grocery expenses. "Why don't you sell your graphic design stuff to more than one person at a time?" I paused, confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration, "you make those logo things for companies, right? And it takes you a lot of time and then you only sell it once. But what if you made things that lots of people could buy at the same time? Like stock graphics?" I asked, surprised by the sophistication of her thinking. She nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Ms. Garcia showed us how authors write one book, but sell it to thousands of people. You could do that with your art, right?" I stared at my daughter, momentarily speechless. She had essentially described a digital product business model, something I had considered years ago but abandoned when my client work became steady. "Charlotte," I said slowly, "that's actually a really smart idea." Her face lit up with pride. "Really? Could it help with the debt?" "It could," I admitted. "It would take some time to create the products and set up an online store, but once it was running, people could buy the designs without me having to create something new each time. So you'd make money even while you're sleeping," she concluded with satisfaction. "That's smart business." I laughed, both at her phrasing and at the realization that my 9-year-old had just proposed a legitimate business strategy that could potentially help our situation. The idea took root, and I began spending my evening hours after Charlotte went to bed creating digital design templates, social media graphics, and illustration packages that could be sold repeatedly to different customers. It was exhausting, adding another 3 hours of work to my already full days, but it also felt hopeful in a way that simply scraping by did not. Not every day was productive, however. There were evenings when the exhaustion and stress caught up with me, when the collection calls had been particularly aggressive, or a client had delayed payment. On those nights, I would sometimes find myself sitting on the kitchen floor after Charlotte was asleep, crying silently into a dish towel to muffle the sound. During one such moment of despair, Charlotte had appeared in the doorway, awakened by a nightmare or perhaps some sixth sense that her mother needed her. "Mom?" she had called softly, her voice thick with sleep. "Are you okay?" I had hastily wiped my eyes, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, honey. Just tired. Let's get you back to bed." She had studied me with those perceptive eyes, then walked over and wrapped her small arms around my shoulders. "It's okay to be sad sometimes," she had said, echoing my own words back to me. "You don't have to be strong all the time." In that moment, the roles had reversed completely, my child offering me the same reassurance I had given her. I had cried then without restraint, holding her close, allowing myself the release I so desperately needed. "I'm sorry," I had whispered when the tears finally subsided. "Why?" she had asked, genuinely puzzled. "You let me cry when I'm sad." The simple logic of her response had made me laugh through my tears. "You're right. Thank you for reminding me." She had smiled, pleased with herself, and then led me by the hand to the couch where we curled up together under a blanket, both eventually falling asleep there until morning. These moments, the struggles and the small victories, the breakdowns and the breakthroughs, formed the texture of our new life. It wasn't the life I had planned, or the one Charlotte deserved, but we were building it together, day by day, with a resilience that continued to surprise me. 6 weeks after Cole's departure, the raw wound of his betrayal had begun to scab over, though it still ached when touched. My days had developed a rhythm: work, parenting, managing creditors, repeat, that left little time for dwelling on what might have been. The digital product store Charlotte had suggested was live, though sales were modest so far. Each small notification of a template purchased felt like a tiny victory against the mountain of debt we still faced. Charlotte continued to impress and concern me in equal measure. Her resilience was remarkable, but I sometimes caught glimpses of the pain she kept carefully hidden, like when a father-daughter dance was announced at school, or when her friend, Zoe, talked excitedly about her family's upcoming vacation. In those moments, Charlotte's smile would fix in place a little too perfectly, her eyes shuddering briefly before she redirected the conversation with practiced ease. We were surviving, not thriving, but it was enough for now. At least that's what I told myself. The turning point came on an ordinary Wednesday evening. Charlotte and I were sorting through a box of old photographs I'd found while looking for tax documents in the garage. Most were from before Charlotte was born: Cole and me in college, our early dating years, our budget honeymoon to Florida. Charlotte was particularly fascinated by these glimpses of her parents' former lives. "You look so happy," she observed, studying a photo of Cole and me on a beach, sun-kissed and laughing. "We were," I said softly, allowing myself a moment of nostalgia without the bitter edge that usually accompanied thoughts of my soon-to-be ex-husband. Charlotte continued flipping through the photos, occasionally asking questions about where they were taken or who the other people were. Then she paused, holding up a picture I hadn't seen in years. "Who's this lady with Dad?" she asked. I took the photo, momentarily confused. It showed Cole standing with an older woman I didn't immediately recognize, both smiling at the camera in what appeared to be an office setting. Cole was wearing a company shirt from his first job after college. "I'm not sure," I admitted, squinting at the faded image. "Probably someone he worked with at Brighton Marketing. That was before he joined Reynolds and Associates." Charlotte took the photo back, studying it with surprising intensity. "She looks like the lady in Dad's wallet picture." I blinked, not immediately. Understanding. "What wallet picture?" "The old lady picture Dad kept in his wallet," Charlotte explained, as if this should be obvious. "He showed me once when I found it. He said it was his aunt who helped him get his first job." A vague memory surfaced. Cole mentioning an aunt who had connections in the marketing world, someone who had given him his first break. I hadn't thought about her in years, and I wasn't sure I'd ever actually met her. "Aunt Patricia?" I guessed, trying to recall the name. "Aunt Pauline," Charlotte corrected. "He said she was really rich and lived in a big house in California." I stared at my daughter, something clicking in my mind. "Cole had a wealthy aunt in California? Are you sure?" Charlotte nodded confidently. "Yep. He said she didn't have kids of her own, so she helped him a lot. He said someday he might inherit her house, but it was a secret because the other cousins didn't know." This was entirely new information to me. In 14 years of marriage, Cole had mentioned this aunt occasionally, but had never discussed any potential inheritance. Why would he tell our 9-year-old daughter about it but not his wife? "Did Dad talk about Aunt Pauline a lot?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Charlotte shrugged. "Sometimes. Mostly when you weren't around. He called her last month before he left. I heard him in his office. He was asking if he could stay in her guest house for a while." My heart began to race. Last month, before he left. Cole had been planning his escape, coordinating with a wealthy relative I barely knew existed. "Charlotte," I said carefully, This is really important. Do you remember Aunt Pauline's last name? Or where in California she lives? She screwed up her face in concentration. I think it started with an M something. And I know she lives in a place that sounds like candy. Candy? I repeated. Confused? Yeah, like the chocolate candy bars. Dad said it was where all the movie stars live. Manhattan Beach? I guessed. Charlotte shook her head. No. Malibu. That's it. He said Aunt Pauline has a house in Malibu with a pool that looks at the ocean. A wealthy relative with a beachfront home in Malibu who might leave Cole an inheritance. If this woman existed, she could be key to understanding Cole's finances and possibly locating assets he hadn't disclosed. Charlotte, I said, trying to contain my growing excitement. You are absolutely brilliant. She beamed at the praise, though she clearly didn't understand its significance. For remembering Aunt Pauline? Yes, for remembering such important details. This might really help us. Her expression grew serious, intuiting from my tone that this was more than just an interesting discovery. Is it about the money Dad took? I nodded, deciding that honesty was appropriate in this moment. It might help us find some of the money, yes, or at least understand more about Dad's plans. Charlotte considered this, then asked the question that had probably been lingering in her mind for weeks. Do you think Dad went to Aunt Pauline's house instead of Bali? The Instagram photos of Cole and Brooke in Bali flashed through my mind. Sunset cocktails, infinity pools, luxury resorts. I had assumed they were spending our savings and maxing out credit cards to fund this lavish escape. But what if that was just for show? What if their real destination had been a rent-free guest house in Malibu? I don't know, I said honestly. But we're going to find out. Charlotte nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then she surprised me with her next observation. Mom, if Dad has a rich aunt, shouldn't she help pay the money he owes us? That would be fair, right? I stared at my daughter, once again astounded by her practical approach to our situation. The idea hadn't even occurred to me yet. I was still processing the possibility that Cole might have assets or support I knew nothing about. That's actually a very interesting question, I said slowly. Legally, Aunt Pauline probably doesn't have to pay Dad's debts. But if she's helping him hide from his responsibilities, that's a different story. Charlotte nodded sagely, as if this confirmed something she'd already concluded. We should tell Mr. Dominic about her. He'll know what to do. Mr. Dominic, my lawyer, whom Charlotte had met briefly when he'd stopped by the house to have me sign some papers. She was absolutely right. This was information Dominic needed immediately. I pulled her into a tight hug, overwhelmed by the potential breakthrough her childhood memories might have just provided. You know what, Charlotte? I think you might have just changed everything. The discovery of Aunt Pauline injected a new energy into our situation. For the first time since Cole's departure, I felt something beyond just determination to survive. I felt a flicker of hope that we might actually find justice. I called Dominic first thing the next morning, pacing the kitchen as I relayed Charlotte's revelation. A wealthy aunt in Malibu, he repeated, his tone shifting from professional to intrigued. And your daughter believes Cole may have been planning to stay with her? Yes. Apparently, he called her before he left, asking about her guest house. Charlotte overheard the conversation. This could be significant, Dominic said, and I could hear him typing notes in the background. If Cole has access to assets or support we don't know about, it could change our approach to the divorce proceedings. More importantly, if he's actually in California rather than Bali, we might be able to serve him with papers. How do we find out? I asked. Leave that to me, Dominic replied. I have a colleague in California who specializes in asset investigations. What was the aunt's name again? Pauline M. something, I said, frustrated by the limited information. Charlotte couldn't remember the last name, just that it started with M. And she lives in Malibu, apparently in a house with an ocean view. That narrows it down to about 500 wealthy homeowners, Dominic said dryly. But if she's Cole's aunt, we can work backward through his family records. Do you have his parents' contact information? I hesitated. Yes, but I'm not sure they'll be forthcoming. They've been cordial for Charlotte's sake, but they're still his parents. Let me handle them, Dominic suggested. Sometimes people are more responsive to official inquiries from an attorney than they would be to a family member. After hanging up, I found Charlotte at the kitchen table, carefully organizing her school supplies for the day. She looked up as I entered, her expression questioning. Mr. Dominic thinks your information about Aunt Pauline is very helpful, I told her, pouring myself a much-needed cup of coffee. He's going to try to find her. Charlotte nodded, looking pleased but also thoughtful. What happens if he does find her? And Dad is there? It was a good question, one I hadn't fully considered in my excitement over this potential lead. What was the end game here? Confrontation? Legal consequences? Financial recovery? Well, I said, sitting across from her, if we can prove where Dad is, the court can make sure he receives the divorce papers. And if he's been hiding money or has access to money we didn't know about, that could help us with the debt he left us. Charlotte considered this, her brow furrowed in concentration. But what if Aunt Pauline doesn't know what Dad did? What if he lied to her too? Another insightful question that gave me pause. We were operating on the assumption that this aunt was complicit in Cole's abandonment of his responsibilities, but Charlotte raised a valid point. What if she was just another person Cole had manipulated? That's possible, I acknowledged. If that's the case, she might actually help us once she knows the truth. Charlotte nodded, satisfied with this answer. Then she surprised me with her next suggestion. We should make a detective board, she said decisively. Like in those mystery shows, with all the clues about Dad and the money and Aunt Pauline. I couldn't help but smile at the idea, which seemed pulled straight from a children's mystery novel. But as I thought about it, the concept had merit. Organizing everything we knew visually might help us see connections we'd missed. That's not a bad idea, I admitted. It would help us keep track of all the information. Charlotte's eyes lit up with excitement. We can use the corkboard from your office, and I can be in charge of the sticky notes and string. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself nodding. Okay, detective, we'll set it up after school today. That evening, after Charlotte's homework was complete, we transformed the corkboard that normally held my design inspiration into a visual map of our investigation. Charlotte took her role as investigation assistant very seriously, meticulously writing out key facts on color-coded sticky notes. Yellow is for Dad, she explained as she worked. Blue is for money clues, pink is for Aunt Pauline, and green is for action items. I watched her arrange the notes in clusters, connecting related pieces with lengths of red yarn. It was surprisingly comprehensive. Cole's known timeline, the financial discrepancies we'd discovered, the scattered mentions of Aunt Pauline, and outstanding questions that needed answers. We should add what we know about Brooke, too, Charlotte suggested, reaching for a stack of orange sticky notes. She might post something that gives us clues. She was right. While I'd been avoiding Cole's social media beyond occasional masochistic checks, a more systematic review of both his and Brooke's online presence might yield valuable information. As we worked, I received a text from Dominic. Found something. Pauline Morrison, 72, homeowner in Malibu, Cole's father's sister, call. Me! Charlotte! I exclaimed, showing her the message. Mr. Dominic found Aunt Pauline! Her eyes widened with excitement. Already? That was fast. What's her whole name? Pauline Morrison, I replied, already pulling up a search engine on my phone. Let's see what we can find out about her. Together, we discovered that Pauline Morrison was a retired executive from a major tech company who had made her fortune during the first internet boom. There were several photos of her at charity events in the Los Angeles area. always elegantly dressed and often accompanied by much younger companions. "She looks nice," Charlotte observed, studying a photo of Pauline accepting an award for philanthropic work. "Not like someone who would help Dad hide from us." "People can surprise you," I said carefully, not wanting to prejudge someone I'd never met. "But you're right. She does seem accomplished and respected. Maybe she doesn't know the full story." We added Pauline's information to our investigation board, creating a new cluster of pink sticky notes with everything we'd learned about her. As we stepped back to review our work, I was struck by how much clearer the situation seemed when laid out visually. "What's our next move?" Charlotte asked, hands on her hips as she surveyed our creation. I smiled at her terminology, pulled straight from detective shows. "Mr. Dominic is going to try to determine if Dad is actually staying with Aunt Pauline. And I think we should review Dad and Brooke's social media more carefully, looking for any inconsistencies that might tell us where they really are." Charlotte nodded seriously. "And we should check if the Bali pictures are really from right now. Sometimes people post old pictures and pretend they're new." I stared at my daughter, once again struck by her perceptiveness. Of course, the photos Cole and Brooke had been posting could be from a previous trip, or even stock images. I hadn't thought to verify their authenticity. "That's brilliant, Charlotte," I said. "We'll check for date markers in the photos. Seasonal. Decorations, weather patterns, anything that might tell us when they were really taken." For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of genuine optimism. We weren't just passive victims of Cole's betrayal anymore. We were actively investigating, gathering information, formulating a plan. And Charlotte wasn't just coping with her father's abandonment. She was channeling her pain and confusion into something constructive. Our detective board might have looked like a child's game to an outsider, but to us, it represented something powerful. Control. We couldn't change what Cole had done, but we could choose how we responded. And right now, we were choosing to fight back. Together. The investigation into Pauline Morrison and Cole's potential whereabouts moved faster than I expected. Dominic's California contact was thorough, confirming within days that Pauline Morrison did indeed own a substantial property in Malibu with a guest house, just as Charlotte had described. More importantly, the investigator had conducted discreet surveillance and confirmed what we had begun to suspect. Cole was there. Not in Bali with Brooke as his social media suggested, but living in his wealthy aunt's guest house on the California coast. "The posts are fake," I told Charlotte after receiving Dominic's update. "Dad's been in California this whole time, not Bali." Charlotte absorbed this information with surprising calm. "I knew it," she said finally. "The pictures had the wrong flowers." "What do you mean?" "In their beach pictures, there are plumeria flowers. We learned about them in science class. They grow in Hawaii and Bali. But in one picture, there are also California poppies in a vase. Those don't grow in Bali." I stared at my daughter, astounded by her attention to detail. I hadn't noticed the flowers in the background of Cole's supposed vacation photos, but Charlotte had, and had recognized the geographical inconsistency. Armed with confirmation of Cole's location, Dominic moved quickly to have him served with divorce papers. The process server caught Cole leaving Pauline's property in a Mercedes convertible, a car I'd never seen before. "He's been served," Dominic reported. And he looked shocked. Clearly wasn't expecting to be found. The next step was a court hearing to address the financial issues. With evidence that Cole had deliberately misrepresented his whereabouts and potential access to assets, the judge issued a temporary order freezing any accounts in his name and requiring a full financial disclosure within 10 days. Charlotte and I celebrated this small victory with ice cream sundaes at home, a budget-friendly indulgence that felt significant nonetheless. "What happens now?" Charlotte asked, licking chocolate sauce from her spoon. "Now we wait for Dad to respond to the court order," I explained. "He has to tell the truth about all his money and accounts." "Will he do that?" she asked, her expression doubtful. It was a fair question. Cole had already demonstrated a willingness to lie and deceive. He doesn't have much choice, I said. Ignoring a court order has serious consequences. What I didn't tell Charlotte was that Dominic had also reached out directly to Pauline Morrison. To my surprise, she had agreed to meet with me, alone, the following week. She claims she didn't know the full story, Dominic had told me. Says Cole told her you were separated for months and had agreed to the divorce. She seemed genuinely shocked when I explained the actual situation. This meeting with Pauline could be crucial, not just for potential financial recovery, but for understanding the full scope of Cole's deception. For the first time since he left, I felt like we were making real progress, taking concrete steps toward resolution rather than just surviving day to day. That night, I updated our investigation board, moving several sticky notes from the questions column to answers. Charlotte watched with satisfaction as the board shifted from a collection of mysteries to a record of discoveries. "We're good detectives," she declared, adding a new green sticky note. "Operation Find Dad. Mission accomplished." The day before my scheduled meeting with Pauline Morrison, I received a call from Dominic that sent our carefully constructed plans into disarray. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Cole's filed for bankruptcy." The word hit me like a physical blow. Bankruptcy? What does that mean for us? "It's complicated," Dominic explained. "He's filed for Chapter 7, claiming he has no ability to pay his debts. It automatically puts a stay on all collection actions, potentially including our divorce proceedings." "He can't do that," I protested. "He has access to money. He's driving a Mercedes and living in a Malibu guest house." "Which is why this looks like a deliberate attempt to avoid financial responsibility," Dominic agreed. "But it still creates complications. The bankruptcy court will appoint a trustee who'll investigate his assets, but that takes time. And if the car belongs to his aunt and he's not paying rent, he could argue he has no significant assets." I sank into a chair, the familiar weight of anxiety settling back onto my shoulders just when I thought we were making progress. "What about the meeting with Pauline tomorrow?" "Still go," Dominic advised. "But be careful what you say. With this bankruptcy, filing, anything that could be interpreted as harassment or undue pressure could backfire." I hung up feeling deflated. When Charlotte came home from school, vibrating with excitement about our progress, I struggled with how much to tell her. "Did something happen?" she asked immediately, reading my expression with her usual perceptiveness. I sighed, deciding on a simplified truth. "Dad's trying to use legal tricks to avoid paying what he owes. It might make things take longer than we hoped." Charlotte absorbed this, her face scrunching in thought. "That's not fair," she said finally. "But we're still meeting the aunt tomorrow, right?" "Yes," I confirmed. "I'm still going to meet with her." "Can I come?" she asked hopefully. I shook my head. "Not this time. It's going to be a grown-up conversation that might get complicated." Though disappointed, Charlotte accepted this decision with her usual maturity. Then she surprised me with her next question. "Does Dad know we found Aunt Pauline? Maybe that's why he's doing the bankruptcy thing now." Once again, my daughter's insight was startling. The timing of Cole's bankruptcy filing, immediately after, being served with divorce papers at Pauline's house, suggested it was indeed a reactive move. "You know what? I think you're right," I told her. "Dad's probably panicking because we figured out his plan." Charlotte nodded, a determined gleam in her eye. "Then we just need a better plan." That evening, as I prepared for the meeting with Pauline, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. The message made my blood run cold. "Back off or you'll regret it. Leave Pauline out of this." It had to be from Cole. The timing, the reference to Pauline, the threatening tone, it all fit his increasingly desperate attempts to avoid responsibility. Showed the message to Dominic, who advised documenting it, but otherwise ignoring the threat. "This actually helps our case," he noted. "It shows consciousness of guilt." Despite his reassurance, I slept poorly that night, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Cole's bankruptcy filing and threatening message had transformed what had felt like progress into a new set of obstacles. Just when we thought we were gaining ground, the path forward had become more complicated than ever. Pauline Morrison's Malibu home was exactly as Charlotte had described, a sprawling oceanfront property with an infinity pool that seemed to merge with the Pacific. The main house was modern and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows capturing the breathtaking coastal view. The guest house, where Cole was apparently staying, was visible at the far end of the property. I'd half expected Pauline to cancel after Cole's threatening text, but her assistant had confirmed our appointment that morning. Now, sitting in her pristine white living room, I waited nervously, rehearsing what I would say. When Pauline entered, I was struck by how little she resembled Cole. Tall and slender, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob, she carried herself with the confident grace of a woman accustomed to commanding rooms. Her expression was cautious but not unkind. "Mrs. Reynolds," she said, extending her hand. "I appreciate you coming." "Ms. Morrison," I replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." She gestured for me to sit, then took a seat across from me. "Your lawyer has shared some concerning information with me. I'd like to hear your perspective." I took a deep breath and told her everything. The abandoned debt, the drained accounts, Charlotte's devastation, and Cole's increasingly manipulative behavior. I showed her the threatening text, the bankruptcy filing, and our financial statements, showing the accumulated debt in Cole's name. Pauline listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. "I had no idea," she said finally. "Cole told me you had separated months ago, that you had agreed to divorce but were being vindictive about financial matters. He said he needed space to sort things out." "That's not true," I said quietly. "He left without warning, taking our savings and leaving massive debt behind." Pauline nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I believe you. Cole has always been selective with the truth when it suits him. Even as a child." She rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the ocean. "Did you know I paid for his college and his MBA and bailed him out of financial trouble twice before? I've always had a soft spot for my brother's only son, despite his tendency to create his own problems." This was new information, and it painted a picture of Cole I hadn't fully seen before, a pattern of financial irresponsibility and dependence on his aunt's generosity. Pauline turned back to me, her decision made. "I won't continue enabling this behavior. Cole needs to face the consequences of his actions." She reached for her phone. "I'd like to call your lawyer now, if that's all right. I have information about assets Cole hasn't disclosed that will be relevant to both the divorce and bankruptcy proceedings." As she dialed, I felt a wave of relief so powerful my hands began to shake. This was the breakthrough we needed. Someone who knew Cole's financial history and had the integrity to tell the truth. Pauline spoke with Dominic for nearly 30 minutes, revealing details about money she had given Cole over the years, accounts she believed he maintained offshore, and his pattern of financial deception. She agreed to provide formal statements and documentation to both the divorce court and bankruptcy trustee. Before I left, she asked one question that caught me off guard. "How is Charlotte handling all this?" The genuine concern in her voice was unexpected. "She's incredibly resilient," I answered honestly. "Stronger than I ever knew a 9-year-old could be." Pauline nodded, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I've never met her. Cole always had excuses when I suggested visiting. I'd like to change that if you're comfortable with it." This potential connection, a great Aunt Charlotte had never known but who seemed genuinely interested in her welfare, felt like another small victory amid the chaos. As I drove home, I realized this meeting had been the turning point we needed. With Pauline's testimony and evidence, Cole's web of lies would unravel. The path forward was still complex, but for the first time, justice seemed not just possible, but inevitable. The weeks following my meeting with Pauline unfolded with surprising speed. With her documentation and testimony, Dominic successfully challenged Cole's bankruptcy filing, arguing that he had misrepresented his financial situation and had access to assets not disclosed to the court. The bankruptcy trustee, presented with evidence of potential fraud, conducted a thorough investigation that revealed exactly what Pauline had suggested. Cole maintained an offshore account in the Cayman Islands containing nearly $80,000, money he had gradually siphoned from our joint accounts over the past 2 years. Cole's reaction to being exposed was not to fight, but to flee. Again. He abandoned his aunt's guest house overnight, leaving even Brooke behind. According to Pauline, their relationship had been deteriorating as funds dwindled, and the reality of Cole's situation became clear. Brooke had apparently expected a glamorous, new life with a wealthy man, not a fugitive from financial responsibility. With Cole's bankruptcy dismissed and his hidden assets identified, the court froze his offshore account and issued orders for the funds to be repatriated to satisfy his debts. It wouldn't cover everything, but it would address the most pressing financial concerns: the credit card debt, the personal loan, and the outstanding mortgage payments. At home, practical improvements appeared almost immediately. The collection calls stopped. The threatening letters ceased. For the first time in months, I checked our mail without dread, reviewed bank statements without anxiety. Charlotte noticed the change in atmosphere right away. "You're smiling more," she observed one evening as we prepared dinner together, a new routine we'd established, with her as my official sous chef. "Things are getting better," I confirmed. "The court found Dad's hidden money, and it's going to help pay off the debt he left us." She nodded sagely, chopping carrots with careful concentration. "Because of Aunt Pauline." "Yes, and because of you," I reminded her. "You're the one who remembered her in the first place." Charlotte allowed herself a small, proud smile. "We make a good team." "The best," I agreed. Indeed, our partnership had evolved beyond mere survival to something genuinely collaborative and mutually supportive. Charlotte still maintained her organizational systems. My color-coded calendar remained on the refrigerator, updated weekly with her neat handwriting. But there was less desperation to the effort, more satisfaction in the routine. My digital product business, born from Charlotte's suggestion months earlier, had begun to generate reliable income. Not enough to make us wealthy, but sufficient to supplement my freelance work and create a modest financial cushion. Each sale felt like another brick in the foundation of our new life. The most unexpected development was Pauline's continued presence. True to her word, she had asked to meet Charlotte, and the two had formed an immediate connection based on their shared appreciation for organization and straight talk. Pauline now visited monthly, always bringing thoughtfully chosen gifts that acknowledged Charlotte's interests rather than attempting to buy her affection. For Christmas, she surprised us both with a practical gift that brought tears to my eyes. She paid off the remainder of our mortgage, effectively removing the largest financial burden from our shoulders. "Consider it restitution for my nephew's behavior," she said when I tried to protest, "and an investment in Charlotte's future." Cole remained elusive, reportedly traveling through Southeast Asia to stay beyond the reach of American courts. His Instagram posts had stopped entirely. No more staged photos of tropical paradise. No more pretense of the perfect escape. His absence, once a gaping wound in our lives, had gradually transformed into something else. Not quite healing, but adaptation. We had built a new normal that didn't include him, and discovered it was stronger than the life he had abandoned. A year after Cole's departure, on a crisp autumn evening, Charlotte and I sat on our back porch with mugs of hot chocolate, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was a moment of simple peace that would have been unimaginable in those first desperate weeks after he left. "Mom," Charlotte said, breaking our comfortable silence. "I've been thinking about Dad." I glanced at her, noting how much she'd grown in the past year, not just physically, but emotionally. At 10, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that hadn't existed before. "What about him?" I asked carefully. She stared into her mug, considering her words. "I used to think he left because of something wrong with us, but now I think he left because of something wrong with him." Her insight struck me with its simple clarity. It had taken me months of therapy to reach the same conclusion, that Cole's abandonment reflected his character flaws, not our worthiness. "That's very wise," I said softly. "And I think you're right." Charlotte nodded, processing this validation. "Ms. Garcia says some people run away from problems instead of fixing them. That's what Dad did, right?" "Yes," I agreed. "That's exactly what he did." She was quiet for another moment, then asked the question that perhaps had been lingering all along. "Do you think he'll ever come back?" I considered how to answer truthfully without undermining her healing process. "I don't know if he'll try to come back someday, but I do know that our lives have changed. We've built something new together, something strong. And if he did come back, it wouldn't be the same," she concluded. "No," I confirmed. "It wouldn't." The divorce had been finalized 3 months earlier, with Cole submitting the required documents through an attorney but never appearing in person. The financial settlement had addressed the debt and established child support payments that I doubted would ever materialize given his continued evasion of U.S. jurisdiction. Yet strangely, the legal resolution felt almost secondary to the emotional, one we had achieved independently. We had reimagined our lives without waiting for Cole's participation or approval. My freelance business had expanded to include corporate clients and recurring contracts that provided stability. The digital product line Charlotte had inspired now generated enough passive income to fund her college savings account. Our home, once threatened by financial insecurity, had become a truly safe harbor. More significant than these practical achievements was the shift in our perspectives. What had begun as a crisis had transformed into an unexpected journey of growth. I had discovered capabilities I never knew I possessed: financial management skills, entrepreneurial instincts, and a resilience that sustained us through the darkest moments. Charlotte had developed an emotional maturity that, while occasionally concerning in its precocity, would serve her well throughout life. Together, we had learned that family could be redefined, that two people could be complete without requiring a third, and that abandonment, while painful, could be survived and even transcended. As the final rays of sunlight disappeared behind the horizon, Charlotte leaned against my shoulder, comfortable in our shared understanding. The hurt remained. It probably always would to some degree, but it no longer defined us. "We did it, Mom," she said simply. "We figured it out." And in those few words, she captured the essence of our journey. Not just survival, but triumph. Not just endurance, but transformation. 18 months after Cole walked out of our lives, Charlotte and I stood in the doorway of her newly decorated bedroom, admiring our weekend project. Gone were the princess decals and pink walls of her younger years, replaced by teal paint, geometric shelving, and a proper desk where her investigation board had once hung. "It's perfect," she declared, surveying her more grown-up space with satisfaction. At nearly 11, Charlotte had begun middle school with the same quiet determination she'd shown throughout our ordeal. Her teachers consistently praised not just her academic abilities, but her emotional intelligence and problem-solving skills, qualities that had been forged in the crucible of our family crisis. I had changed too. The paralyzed, panicked woman who once sat crying on her kitchen floor, surrounded by bills, now ran a successful design business with multiple employees. The digital product line Charlotte had suggested had expanded into a subscription service for small businesses, providing steady income independent of my client work. Our relationship with Pauline had deepened beyond what either of us could have anticipated. She had become a mentor to me and a loving great aunt to Charlotte, filling roles in our lives that extended far beyond financial support. Her perspective, sharp, pragmatic, occasionally blunt, had proven invaluable as I navigated single parenthood and business ownership. Cole's shadow had gradually receded from our daily lives. Charlotte still occasionally asked about him, but with the curiosity of someone examining a faded photograph rather than the raw pain of abandonment. The last we'd heard, he was in Thailand, teaching English and apparently living modestly. A far cry from the luxury lifestyle he'd abandoned us to pursue. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Cole had fled responsibility in search of freedom, Charlotte and I had faced our challenges head-on and found something more valuable: genuine independence and self-sufficiency. That evening, as Charlotte worked on her science project at her new desk, I received an email from a major design publication wanting to feature my business in their Women Entrepreneurs issue. The writer had heard about my story: single mom, build successful business after financial abandonment, and thought it might inspire others. My first instinct was to decline. Our struggle had been personal, not a motivational story for public consumption. But when I mentioned it to Charlotte, her response surprised me. "You should do it, Mom," she said without hesitation. "It might help someone else who's going through what we did." Her perspective shifted mine. Perhaps sharing our journey, the shock, the struggle, and ultimately the triumph, could offer hope to someone else facing similar circumstances. "Maybe you're right," I admitted. Charlotte smiled, that wise expression I'd come to recognize settling over her features. "I usually am," I laughed, acknowledging the truth in her playful boast. She had been right about so many things, from the digital product line to Aunt Pauline to our capacity to rebuild our lives. As I looked at my daughter, confidently tackling her project in a room that symbolized her growth, I realized the most profound lesson of our journey. Sometimes the worst chapters of our lives lead to the most beautiful transformations. Cole's betrayal had shattered our family, but from those broken pieces, Charlotte and I had built something new and unexpectedly strong. We had discovered capabilities we never knew we possessed, developed a partnership deeper than typical mother-daughter bonds, and created a life that was entirely our own. The road hadn't been easy, and there were surely challenges ahead. But we would face them as we had faced everything else, together, with the resilience and determination that had become our hallmarks. "We're going to be okay," Charlotte had said in those early, desperate days after Cole left. She had been right about that too. We weren't just okay, we were thriving. They say that life's most difficult moments reveal who we truly are. When Cole walked out on our family, leaving nothing but debt and devastation in his wake, I discovered truths about myself, about my daughter, and about resilience that I never would have learned in easier times. This story isn't just about a husband's betrayal or a mother and daughter overcoming financial hardship. It's about the unexpected strength that emerges when we're forced to rebuild from ruins. It's about discovering that our greatest resources often lie within ourselves and the people who stand beside us, even when those people are only 9 years old. Charlotte's simple statement, "We'll figure it out," became more than just childish optimism. It became our mantra, our strategy, and ultimately, our reality. In those 4 words lay the essence of resilience, the belief that challenges, no matter how overwhelming, can be faced and overcome through persistence, creativity, and courage. What I've learned through this journey is that life's worst betrayals don't have to define us. We can acknowledge their pain while refusing to be limited by them. We can transform our wounds into wisdom, our struggles into strength, our setbacks into stepping stones. Had Cole not left, I might never have discovered my entrepreneurial abilities or Charlotte's remarkable emotional intelligence. I might have continued indefinitely in a relationship built on illusions rather than honesty, I might never have known the deep satisfaction of creating security through my own efforts, or the joy of the bond that forms when a parent and child face adversity together. This isn't to say I'm grateful for what happened. The pain was real. The challenge is daunting. But I've come to recognize that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually a beginning. What seems like destruction can become creation. What appears to be a crisis can become a catalyst for growth. If you're facing your own moment of betrayal or devastation, know this: you are stronger than you realize. And with enough time, enough support, and enough determination, you too will be able to say with confidence, "We figured it out." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.